slave families. An overview of Cape Slave. As Cape slaves were first presented in the Cape in 1658, it also happened to be 6 years after the Dutch East India Company established a refreshment station at the Cape. As you can see, slaves were transported by sea to the Cape by various regions of the Indian Ocean, where the VAC, also known as the Verenigde Ostend Company, imported slaves from Madagascar and Mozambique. They were then situated at the slave lodge. Slaves were either owned by the company itself or by company employees and free burghers in a private capacity. The aim of Cape Slave was to provide fresh food, water, medical assistance, and repairs for the company's ship involved in the lucrative spice trade in the East. Emerging into slavery, gender roles and duties. Men and women slaves suffered greatly. Both were forcefully removed from their homes and family in order to perform gruesome labor. They were mentally degraded and stripped of their dignity. Furthermore, they were savagely beaten and, regardless of gender, treated as property.
Strong young men were more in demand from buyers. They were assigned to jobs as carpenters and blacksmiths, however, also in the field. But slave buyers realized that females are cheaper and readily available, and also very effective in the field. As a result, women soon outnumbered men in the field and became what they call cotton pickers. What is more, labor segregation by sex and frequency with which male slaves were sold meant women were not only left to raise their children alone, but also to rely on female friends, relation above husbands. And finally, most slave women took their motherhood seriously. They put their responsibilities for their children before their own safety and freedom, provided for children of their own, and gave love even to those babies born from violence. The condition of slave families. They say many slaves were used as domestic workers because of their social skill and because it didn't require a lot of strength or skill to do the job. The abolition of slavery. Slaves were freed in 1834, but by and large, laborers remained tied to farms and farmers in a paternalistic relationship, which is based on an unequal distribution of power in favor of landowner. This brings us to emancipation in 1834. People enslaved in the Cape Colony found themselves legally free to move around and protected from brutality, maltreatment, and complete submission. But still, title landowners through debt tied housing, Masters and Servants Act of 1856.
An exhibition in memory of slaves has been opened in Cape Town, titled My Name is February, Identities Rooted in Slavery. It tells the stories of why slaves were stripped of their names and then renamed. Let's take a look.
Grandfather never talked about slavery. That was a very quiet subject. No, we never talked about that.
Too many things has been just, swept under the carpet.
They were robbed of everything, even their names. Thousands of slaves renamed, according to the month they arrived in the Cape. Hundreds of years later, some of their families are now able to tell their stories. For 60-year-old Paul October, it's a painful walk down memory lane.
It brings up emotions because that will always be a question within your mind. What was my surname? Seeing that I'm not here in October, it's almost like a step. I'm a stepson, was step in some way and I would like, if possible, before anything happens, to find out really what my surname, would I ever be able to find out who I was really.
Others believe they have done their forefathers proud.
I also remember at school, children would be like January, February, March, April, and sing the surnames like the Kapse would as well. And it's just something that you kind of shrug off and you ignore it after a while. But it's still surname September. I'm incredibly proud and I'm happy to be Chanel September.
The Ezekiel Slave Lodge Museum, the place harboring the history. It says the exhibition is long overdue.
It's important to tell the story because slavery has shaped so many aspects of South Africa. I think not only our history, but also if you look at South Africa today, the language Afrikaans comes out of the slave narrative. Racism is something that comes out of course, of slavery, but it's also a message of hope, of how people brought under those conditions have overcome.
The exhibition depicts the stories of 12 descendants. The museum hopes to turn the exhibition into a travelling piece.